In the heart of the Sahel, where the wind carries whispers of ancient resistance and unfinished revolutions, a political storm was brewing once again. In Bamako, the capital of Mali, interim President A.ss.imi Goïta stood at the window of his presidential office, his eyes fixed on the golden dunes stretching endlessly beyond the city's edge. His mind, however, wandered further, toward a decision that would not only impact his nation but ripple across West Africa. Beside him, Mariama Diallo, his sharp-witted communications advisor, flipped through a stack of classified documents. Her tone was as steady as ever. "Are you sure this tribute is the right move?" she asked, adjusting her glasses. "The world is watching, and any misstep could be seen as weakness. Especially from them." Goïta didn't answer right away. The tension was not just about politics, it was personal. The "them" Mariama referred to, though left unspoken, meant the Burkinabe revolutionaries, especially one name that kept reappearing on international headlines, Ibrahim Traoré. Miles away in Ouagadougou, Traoré sat behind a modest wooden desk in what had once been an abandoned administrative building, now transformed into his command center. The young Burkinabe leader, still bearing the fire of youth in his eyes, was surrounded by maps, intelligence briefings, and folders labeled with urgent regional concerns. He had rallied millions, inspired hope, and rejected the dependency on Western aid. But now, the very unity he had fought for was being put to the test. His deputy, Sadio Keita, leaned over his shoulder. "The streets are buzzing," he said quietly. "Word of Goïta's upcoming speech is spreading like wildfire. Some say he might finally acknowledge you." Traoré's lips curled slightly, not in joy, but uncertainty. "Goïta doesn't give without calculation," he muttered. "If he praises me, it's because he wants something in return, or fears something greater." Meanwhile, on the outskirts of Ouagadougou, activist Fatima Diarra led passionate protests against the spiraling corruption and unending violence engulfing the Sahel. She had no patience for political theater. Her voice echoed across the dusty streets like thunder, "This so-called tribute? It's a game. A trap. But let's see how Traoré responds. If he bends, we'll know the truth." Tensions across the region reached a boiling point. To many, it felt like a chess game between two titans. Goïta, calculated, reserved, and backed by military might. Traoré, young, unpredictable, and carried by the will of the people. But what no one foresaw was the twist that would come when Goïta finally took the podium. The day of the speech arrived under a strange stillness. Bamako was buzzing. International media filled the courtyards of the presidential palace. Rumors swirled. Would Goïta denounce Traoré as a destabilizing populist, or call for unity? Inside, Goïta was reviewing his speech, every word measured, every line rehearsed. Mariama stood nearby, adjusting the microphone one last time. "Balance," she whispered. "Stay balanced." He stepped onto the stage, greeted by applause and skepticism alike. Cameras flashed. Then he began. "At times," Goïta said, his voice steady, "we are told that unity is a dream, that self-reliance in Africa is naive, that a continent so rich in spirit must always be poor in power. But I am here to tell you something else." He paused. The room leaned in. "There is a young man, not far from here, who has proven otherwise. A man who stood against the tide. Who refused to borrow dignity. Who built a movement not on foreign promises, but on local strength." The silence was deafening. "I speak, of course, of Captain Ibrahim Traoré." A ripple went through the room. In Ouagadougou, Sadio dropped his pen. Traoré looked up from his files. Even Fatima Diarra turned to the radio in disbelief. "Traoré," Goïta continued, "has awakened a new conversation across our borders. One where Africa speaks in its own voice. One where the phrase, "New African money," does not refer to foreign aid, but to economic sovereignty, resource control, and innovation born on our own soil. He took a breath. We have often been divided, by language, by colonial borders, by foreign interest. But in Traoré's defiance, I see not rebellion. I see the seeds of African unity. By now, the international media was erupting. The unexpected tribute shattered assumptions. For years, Goïta and Traoré were portrayed as rivals, two leaders locked in a silent struggle for control of the Sahel. And yet, here was Mali's president, publicly aligning himself with a man who had become the symbol of African self-reliance. In the streets of Burkina Faso, cheers broke out. Fatima Diarra raised her hand in a fist. "Maybe," she whispered, "maybe this time, it's real." Later that evening, Traoré addressed his nation in response, not with ego, but with grace. "We do not lead for recognition," he said. "We lead so our people may never bow again. And if the winds of unity are finally blowing, let them lift every voice across this land." That night, something shifted. Borders did not dissolve, but minds did. For the first time in decades, the region imagined itself as one body, beating with one pulse. And in that shared heartbeat echoed a name, Ibrahim Traoré, not just as a man, but as a movement. On the podium in Bamako, Goïta adjusted the microphone. "Words carry weight here," he said, his voice calm but calculated. "Especially when it comes to public recognition." A hushed stillness overtook the crowd as he began his speech. Cameras rolled. Observers held their breath. He spoke of the Sahel's immense challenges, poverty, terrorism, resource plundering, and the urgent need for a unified regional response. Then came the sentence no one expected. "Today, I officially recognize Ibrahim Traoré as a hero of the Sahel." His voice was resolute, echoing across the marble chamber. "He represents the resistance and determination that drive our peoples forward." The impact was immediate. The room erupted, some clapped instinctively, others exchanged uneasy glances. Murmurs of suspicion rippled through the press gallery. Was this an olive branch or a political trap? In Ouagadougou, Traoré watched the broadcast in stunned silence, flanked by his closest allies, Sadio Keita and Fatima Diarra. "They're going to use this against you," Sadio warned, eyes narrowed. "This could be a chess move, designed to frame you as an ally while controlling the narrative." Fatima, always the firebrand, slammed her fist on the desk. "It's a farce," she snapped. "He's manipulating the story to win international favor. Don't let him define who you are." Traoré remained silent, absorbing the complexity of the moment. Was it a trap? Or was it, somehow, a turning point? He stood up suddenly. "I will not respond through press conferences," he declared. "I will respond face to face." The room froze. Even Sadio looked surprised. "I'm going to Bamako." The journey was swift but laden with tension. As Traoré stepped onto Malian soil, a crowd awaited, not with anger, but a strange mix of curiosity and awe. The same man they had once seen as a threat now stood in their capital, unguarded, unwavering. Goïta received him in private, far from the reporters. Their meeting was stark. No fanfare. No applause. "Why did you do it?" Traoré asked, voice firm but searching. "Why that speech?" Goïta smiled faintly. "Because you deserve recognition. And because, perhaps it's time we stop fighting shadows and start building futures." The air between them thickened. Neither trusted the other fully. And yet, something deeper stirred, an uncomfortable truth neither could ignore. Behind the scenes, Mariama Diallo, Goïta's advisor, observed closely. She saw what many politicians failed to see, this wasn't just rivalry, it was history in the making. Two men, burdened by expectation, drawn by duty. Maybe it's time to rethink our approach, she offered gently. The Sahel doesn't need more fractured kingdoms. It needs leaders who stand side by side, not across the battlefield. Her words lingered. The next morning, Traore and Goïta met again. This time, no titles, no ceremony, just two men, two voices, and the weight of a continent between them. You know, this tribute, Traore said, can be seen as a political weapon. I don't want to be used as a symbol for something I'm not. Goïta nodded. Nor do I want my intentions misread. I believe the people need more than politics. They need unity, vision, something new. He placed a document on the table. It was a proposal. A joint summit, he said, on African economic independence. New African money, built by us, for us. No IMF chains. No foreign debt traps. We control the resources. We set the terms. Traore's eyes narrowed. It was bold. Dangerous. But necessary. And, he asked. We host it together, Goïta said. Not as rivals. As African leaders. Back in Ouagadougou, Fatima led mass protests. We will not eat speeches, the crowd shouted. Their signs read, dignity is not for sale, real change, not praise, and, don't be their symbol, be our voice. She knew the next move would define Traore's legacy. He must represent all of us, she told the crowd. Not just his own name. And then, the unexpected happened. 3 days later, in a powerful joint press conference, Ibrahim Traoré and A.ss.imi Goïta stood together. Today, Goïta began, we announced the formation of the Sahel Economic Sovereignty Initiative, a coalition of nations committed to African unity, built on African self-reliance. Traoré stepped forward. This is not an alliance of convenience, he said. This is an alliance of conviction. No more dependence. No more borrowed futures. We are the architects of our own destiny. The world watched, stunned. The moment went viral. Social media erupted. African youth saw something they had never seen before, leaders choosing cooperation over ego. Fatima, standing with her protesters, watched the announcement live. A tear slipped down her cheek. Maybe, she whispered, this is the beginning we've been fighting for. The air in Bamo buzzed with anticipation. Days had passed since Goïta's unexpected tribute, and across the Sahel, people waited for one thing, Ibrahim Traoré's response. The leader of Burkina Faso had spent sleepless nights writing, erasing, rewriting. He understood that his words would not only echo through microphones but through history itself. I have to speak the truth, he told Sadio, voice low but firm. Even if it costs me support. Sadio nodded slowly. He respected Traoré's integrity. It was, after all, the same honesty that had inspired a generation to believe in a new Africa, an Africa no longer dependent on charity, but powered by self-reliance. Behind closed doors, Goïta and Traoré continued to meet, searching for common ground. Their conversations were private, tense, but honest. No aides, no cameras. Just two leaders wrestling with the legacy of colonization and the weight of regional expectations. Meanwhile, the world watched. Then came the day. A grand stage was erected in the heart of Bamo. Tens of thousands flooded the square. Millions more tuned in across Africa and the diaspora. It was not just a political event, it was a turning point. Traoré walked to the microphone slowly. The sun blazed above him, but his expression was calm, even solemn. He scanned the sea of expectant faces, then began. President Goïta called me a hero of the Sahel, he said, his voice carrying across the plaza. But I stand before you today to tell you this: there are no heroes in a Sahel ravaged by war and injustice. There is only struggle. And the will to rise. The silence was electric. Not even a cough interrupted him. He continued, revealing painful truths. He spoke of sleepless nights, of security threats, of the people who went missing under foreign drone fire and militia raids. He spoke of economic sabotage, and how new African money wasn't about flashy projects or foreign loans. It was about building value from within, local farming co-ops, solar villages, Pan-African fintech systems free from Western control. We do not need applause, he said. We need ownership. We do not need heroes. We need unity grounded in truth. He turned to Goïta, who sat on the side of the stage. We cannot be free, he said, while our neighbors remain in chains. But we also cannot move forward on blind faith. We must walk together, but we must walk with transparency, with courage, and with clear eyes. A wave of emotion swept through the crowd. Some erupted in applause. Others remained still, processing the raw honesty. On stage, Goïta stood, moved by the speech. He walked to Traore slowly, extended his hand, and spoke softly for all to hear. You are right. We have much work to do. It was a historic moment, two rivals transformed into partners, not by force or diplomacy, but by the simple power of truth spoken aloud. Behind the curtain, Mariama Diallo watched, eyes damp. This will echo for years, she whispered to Goïta later. He nodded, the weight of the moment heavy on his shoulders. Back in Ouagadougou, Fatima Diarra watched the speech with tears in her eyes. He spoke, she murmured, and not just for himself, for all of us. Around her, activists embraced, hopeful yet cautious. The fight wasn't over, but now, at least, they knew they were being seen. In the days that followed, a new rhythm settled over the Sahel. It was tentative, but alive. Fatima organized a community conference to turn words into action. Hundreds filled the improvised hall, eager for direction. We cannot wait for governments, she said, standing before the crowd. The future is not only in their hands. It's in ours. We must organize. Mobilize. Build systems they can't ignore. Let's create markets, schools, healing centers. Let's build African futures from African soil. In the front row sat Traore, quietly taking notes. At the same time in Mali, Goïta convened a regional summit, inviting Niger, Chad, and Guinea-Bissau. We must learn from one another, he declared. We must build networks of resilience, not charity. A Pan-African economic alliance, rooted in trust and sovereignty. It was a new chapter. From the fire of suspicion and the ashes of division, something remarkable had emerged. A regional alliance, not imposed from abroad, but born of shared pain and mutual respect. The world had expected another conflict. Another failed handshake. Another photo op. Instead, they got something harder. Something deeper. An honest confrontation. A mutual reckoning. A new beginning. In the markets of Bamako, children now played a game they called Unity Leaders, mimicking Traore and Goïta not as enemies, but as brothers building a new Africa. And across the Sahel, a whisper rose, carried on the desert wind. We are not waiting for the world to save us. We are saving ourselves. While maps and development charts covered the table, Ibrahim Traoré spoke with a conviction that carried through the room. We are building bridges where there were only chasms, he said during a press conference, his voice firm, his message clear. The crowd responded with warm applause, sensing that something fragile but genuine was beginning to take root. He and A.ss.imi Goïta had started working on joint initiatives, from rebuilding rural schools to launching cooperative agricultural programs. It was a cautious partnership, born not from convenience but from shared necessity. The Sahel, long scarred by conflict and foreign interference, was now witnessing two leaders attempting something rare: regional cooperation without foreign strings. Mariama Diallo, always the quiet observer, watched these developments with a mix of hope and healthy skepticism. She knew too well how quickly alliances could crumble under pressure, especially with the looming influence of international powers who preferred a divided Africa. Meanwhile in Ouagadougou, Fatima Diarra remained the people's conscience. She led marches demanding transparency, justice, and measurable change. Words matter, she told her followers, megaphone in hand, but words alone will not feed our children. We need action. Her unwavering pressure helped balance the rising political optimism. Fatima's protests inspired other grassroots movements throughout the region. Farmers, students, and women's groups began to organize, demanding a seat at the table. The Sahel's heart was beating louder, and it wasn't just the leaders who were guiding its rhythm. But it was far from smooth sailing. In closed-door meetings, debates flared over how to allocate limited resources. One Burkinabe diplomat argued, "We can't just divide equally. Each country faces different crises. We must prioritize accordingly." Goïta, however, insisted on a regional perspective. "If we don't address our problems together, none of us will succeed. Unity isn't a slogan, it's a strategy." His words echoed a harsh truth: cooperation requires sacrifice. No one nation could hoard victories without dooming the others to failure. Traore understood this deeply. His commitment to new African money meant more than rejecting foreign aid. It meant investing in shared infrastructure, regional currencies, and African tech ecosystems. It meant betting on themselves. Both leaders knew their efforts would be judged not by speeches but by tangible results. And so they pressed forward, brick by brick, into the uncertain future. The Sahel, long plagued by despair, was beginning to breathe again. Not in triumph, but in cautious optimism. Each victory, however small, was celebrated. A new well. A successful crop season. A reopened school. But each failure brought renewed determination. The journey was long. The burden was heavy. Yet for the first time in years, it didn't feel hopeless. Months later, as the sun dipped below the horizon in Ouagadougou, Traore walked the newly cleaned streets. Children laughed and kicked soccer balls in public plazas once abandoned. Small businesses, funded by local microloans and regional investment funds, had begun to thrive. He remembered the speech he gave in Bamako. He had spoken not of heroes, but of responsibility. Of transparency. Of building something real. Now, looking around, he realized something had changed. Not everything. Not enough. But something. It was hope. And with it came the burden to remain vigilant. Progress, he knew, was not a gift. It was a fight. Daily. Relentless. Earned. In Bamako, Goïta stood alone on the palace balcony, looking toward the fading light. He thought back to the day he had called Traore a hero. At the time, it had been a political gamble. But now, it wasn't a gesture, he whispered to himself. It was a beginning. The Sahel, he knew, needed more than leaders. It needed visionaries. Builders. Protectors. Listeners. And his own legacy would be measured not just by peace deals or economic charts, but by whether he had helped unite a region long fractured by foreign greed and internal distrust. Back in Ouagadougou, Fatima still led demonstrations. But her voice, once filled with fury, now carried hopeful resolve. We are building something together, she told a packed community forum. Not just waiting for promises. We are planting. Organizing. Owning our future. She pointed to the young faces before her. This is new African power. Not in capitals, but in communities. The crowd roared. In that moment, it became clear, the revolution was not just in palaces or speeches. It was in people. The alliance between Goïta and Traore remained fragile. ICA no longer had to choose between dependence and despair. It could choose something else. Self-reliance. Unity. And truth. The road ahead was long, uncertain, and often dangerous. But for the first time in decades, it felt like the Sahel was walking it together. And that, more than any headline or tribute, was the real beginning. We cannot let up now, Fatima Diarra declared, her voice carrying over the crowd gathered in the heart of Ouagadougou. There is still so much work to do. Her words struck deep, full of urgency, but also fire. Around her, faces lifted with purpose. Students, elders, farmers, and mothers listened not as spectators, but as builders of the very future she spoke of. Her passion was contagious. In her defiance and clarity, people found not just inspiration, but responsibility. She reminded them that true power does not reside in palaces or speeches. It lives in the people. And real change would come only if everyone, at every level, stood up and took part. These marches had grown into more than protests. They were living symbols of resilience, persistence, and democratic awakening. They were a public oath, we will not be fooled by pretty words or empty ceremonies. If Africa was to rise, it would rise through participation. Meanwhile, the story of Traore and Goïta, once viewed as rival commanders, had now transformed into something else entirely, a symbol of what was possible when courage met dialogue. In a region scarred by centuries of exploitation, division, and silence, their cooperation stood as a rare light. An ember of unity. From Dakar to Niamey, from Bamako to Bobo-Dioulasso, their journey echoed, change is possible. It wasn't fast. It wasn't easy. And it was far from perfect. But it was real. The Sahel was slowly writing a new story, page by page, village by village. Schools were reopening. Local markets began accepting a regional digital currency, part of the new African Money Initiative. Women's cooperatives gained funding. Solar infrastructure lit up towns once abandoned at sunset. Each success was celebrated, but no one forgot the road ahead remained steep. In time, both Traore and Goïta came to understand the weight of their leadership would not be measured only by what they built, but by what they stood for. Not only by their victories, but by their willingness to pursue truth and unity, even when it was hard. At a final regional summit held in Gao, Ibrahim Traoré stood before a crowd of youth leaders and elders. His words were calm but firm. The future is not something that happens to us. It is something we create, together. The crowd fell silent, absorbing every syllable. It wasn't just a speech, it was a promise. A vision. A challenge. The Sahel is not just a battleground, he continued. It is a birthplace. A land of origin. A land of destiny. We are not here to beg for recognition. We are here to claim our story, and write it with dignity. Those words echoed across the region, printed in newspapers, replayed on community radios, and shared across the continent. For the first time in generations, many began to believe again that the Sahel had something to offer the world, not just in minerals or manpower, but in vision, spirit, and leadership. Later that night, under a sky filled with desert stars, Traoré stood beside Sadio, overlooking the city of Ouagadougou. A soft wind blew. There are still many storms ahead, Traoré said, quietly. But our people, they are unbreakable. Sadio nodded, emotion in his eyes. We are stronger together, Traore continued. And that's what will carry us forward. At the same time in Bamako, Goïta stood on his own balcony, gazing at the same stars. The night was quiet. But in his chest, he felt the pulse of something greater than himself. A region on the move. A continent awakening. He thought back to that fateful moment, when he had stood on a stage and named Traore a hero. He hadn't known where that road would lead. But now he saw it clearly. That wasn't politics, he whispered to himself. That was a beginning. He knew that Africa did not need more rulers. It needed visionaries, and more importantly, it needed people who believed in their own power. Every decision he now made would lay another stone on the long road toward sovereignty. And Fatima? She kept marching, but now with a new energy. Her signs no longer only denounced corruption, they demanded policies. Clinics. Books. Jobs. Her movement was no longer against something. It was for something. We're building this together, she told a crowd outside a new youth center. Not because they told us to, but because we finally believe we can. And in that belief was the most powerful currency Africa had ever known. Not dollars. Not euros. But hope, rooted in truth. And backed by the people themselves. The lesson from the Sahel, truth, unity, and the making of a new Africa. At first, it looked like a setup. A calculated political move disguised as a compliment. When Malian President A.ss.imi Goïta publicly referred to Ibrahim Traoré as a hero of the Sahel, the political class across West Africa held its breath. Was it a trap? A veiled insult? Or something more? In a region marked by coups, distrust, and decades of externally driven agendas, such a gesture rarely comes without strings attached. Activists feared manipulation. Diplomats worried about backlash. Some even warned of legal threats, suggesting the tribute was an attempt to bind Traoré into unwanted alliances that could compromise his hard-earned independence. The assumption was simple: in politics, a compliment is rarely just a compliment. But what followed was something few expected, a dramatic reversal, not only in perception, but in the possibility of what African leadership could be. Goïta's words, rather than being a provocation, became the opening of a deeper dialogue. And Ibrahim Traoré, true to his nature, did not react with arrogance or passivity. He responded with clarity, honesty, and strength. This story teaches us several critical lessons, not just about politics, but about power, trust, and the collective future of the African continent. The initial reaction to Goïta's praise of Traoré was one of suspicion. Many assumed it was a political trap or a PR stunt. And perhaps, in part, it was. But it also opened the door for genuine engagement. This teaches us that even in environments of high tension and historical division, not all gestures should be dismissed outright. Sometimes, change begins not with grand plans, but with a shift in tone. Traoré recognized that while Goïta's praise may have had political undercurrents, it was also an opportunity to push the conversation further, to demand transparency, and to call for unity based on truth, not convenience. Traoré could have lashed out. He could have ignored the tribute. Instead, he chose the more difficult path: he engaged. He traveled to Bamako. He met with Goïta face to face. He addressed the public not with flattery, but with brutal honesty. There are no heroes in a Sahel torn by war and injustice. His words reflected a mature form of leadership, one that does not seek validation, but seeks to serve. He spoke not for applause, but for action. And in doing so, he shifted the entire political tone of the region. One of the most powerful outcomes of this story is the joint initiative that Traore and Goïta later launched, a project rooted in the concept of new African money. This idea is not about simply printing new currency or seeking another round of foreign investment. It is about redefining value. It's about investing in African infrastructure with African hands. It's about creating local fintech platforms, regional development banks, and agricultural networks that answer to African needs, not Western metrics. New African money is not just financial, it is psychological. It says, we are enough. This story shows us that economic independence begins with belief, the belief that Africa can build, grow, and innovate on its own terms. Traore's greatest strength in this entire narrative was not charisma or ideology, it was his insistence on truth. When praised, he didn't accept it blindly. He questioned it publicly. He reminded the world that trust must be earned, not assumed. This is the core of African unity. Not forced coalitions. Not paper treaties. But open, transparent, truth-based cooperation. Traore's statement, "We must move forward together, but with transparency and courage," is a doctrine worth embedding into every corner of African governance. Unity does not mean uniformity. It means choosing solidarity, despite differences, for the sake of something bigger than any one leader or nation. While presidents made speeches and signed declarations, the real engine of change came from the streets. From voices like Fatima Diarra, whose grassroots organizing kept leaders accountable. Her words, "We must see results, not just rhetoric," echoed the sentiment of millions across the continent. The lesson here is clear: no leader can carry a revolution alone. Sustainable transformation requires the active participation of civil society. The true strength of African self-reliance lies not only in presidential palaces, but in community halls, marketplaces, and classrooms. Too often, self-reliance is reduced to slogans or policy memos. But Traore's approach showed that it is first and foremost a psychological revolution. He rejected dependency, not just in words, but in action. His government prioritized local solutions, empowered farmers, built solar-powered schools, and implemented regional security strategies without waiting for permission from Paris, Brussels, or Washington. He taught us that African self-reliance begins when leaders stop asking for validation from former colonizers, and start building with what they have. In the end, both Traore and Goïta understood that their legacy would not be measured by titles or ceremonies, but by whether they left their people stronger than they found them. They laid bricks. Reopened schools. Shared resources. And more importantly, they gave people hope that the future could be different. Traore's final words at the summit, "The future is not something that happens to us. It is something we create, together," will echo across Africa for years. Because it wasn't just a speech. It was a roadmap. This story is more than a tale of two leaders. It is the story of a continent at a crossroads. A continent finally learning that unity, money, and power do not have to come from outside. That Africa can shape its own narrative, forge its own alliances, and create its own systems of value and trust. The lesson is this: honor doesn't come from being called a hero. It comes from acting like one, when the cameras are off, and the work still needs doing. And in that spirit, Ibrahim Traoré has become something more than a name. He has become a symbol of what a new Africa could look like: fierce, self-sufficient, united, and true.